Funny women, there's funny women, it's funny women today. Funny women, there's funny women, we love funny women today. Thank you. Thank you very much. What's up, fam? How's everybody doing out there? Hopefully, staying positive and testing negative. Yeah, that's a saying now. Trying to talk to you guys a little bit about Joan Rivers since we're going to be doing stand up this week. Um, I figured this is a good place to start. And there's, you know, I could have started with Phyllis Diller, could have started with Moms Mabley, but the access to their material and content isn't great. So, Joan Rivers sort of won the won the vote in that regard because she's certainly the biggest star from that era. And I wanted to go back to at least the 70s. I think we got back into the 60s there with that first clip. Um, and I think it's great. A lot of you guys in your comments mentioned not just her transformation, but the evolution of comedy over the course of, whatever it is, like 3 decades, 4 decades, whatever. Um, you sort of just see this progression, right? Like in the 60s and even the 70s, like comedy, the setting for comedy was on TV. It was all the late night variety shows and late night talk shows and things like that. That's where comedians sort of got seen. So the first one she's on, I can't remember what talk show, and she's on Carol Burnett, who is a brilliant comedian, sketch comic, and um, one of the greatest to ever do it. She had her own show, bring Joan Rivers on. So there's Flip Wilson, I think she was one of the other shows she was on, variety shows. Then she's hosting The Tonight Show, which was, I can't tell you how huge that was. Like, you guys don't even fucking know who Johnny Carson was in this country. Like like people sat down to watch The Tonight Show with Johnny Carson, like in en masse. Everybody growing up. He was the bar. And comedians going on his show, that was this big rite of passage. That means you had made it. And she filled in. Like, she was a guest host. When Johnny couldn't do it, she guest hosted his show a ton, many times. So that, in and of itself, I think is a nod to her success, her abilities, her voice, all those things. Yeah, you think Jimmy Fallon's a big deal? No, Carson. Carson was the king of late night. Um, and then Letterman came behind him, and then who cares? Um, so I thought it was interesting that a lot of you noted the evolution of comedy stand up over the course of those videos. Kudos to you. Um, so I have a few things that I wanted to say before we get into your specific comments. Just this idea, and it comes up in most of my courses, and it's more and more relevant here. Um, this idea that anytime women move into a quote unquote male space, in this case, comedy or stand-up comedy for sure was a male space. It still is, unfortunately. Baby steps are sort of chipping away at it, and Joan Rivers a lot to has a lot to do with that. But there's this feeling of how is this going to work, right? Like the culture is sort of taken aback or aghast at like a woman talking about sex and not necessarily talking about marriage in the best light. Like how is this gonna work? How are people going to react? How is it gonna change the fabric of our society? Like things are the way they are, and that's how they should be. It's transgressive. Just a woman doing what Joan Rivers did, just her honestly showing up was enough to shake people. Um, and I'll say this a lot too. Comedy should shake people. I mean, I think that's one of the goals, to shake you out of your mundane, rote um, existence, right? Your sort of your your morals, your values, your sort of identity supposed to be like, wait, what am I doing? Like, that's what comedians are supposed to conjure in us, in the audiences. It doesn't always happen, but I think any good comedian, that's what they're going for. And how could you deny that Joan Rivers is going towards that? She's shaking us to be like, oh, I never thought about it like that. I never thought marriage might be kind of a drag for women, and how we define it. Um, Education and body image and like all these things that are, of course, still prevalent today. I get sick of saying that. Um, but anyway, this idea that it's somehow controversial for a woman to step into a male, like, well, again, male space. I'm not saying these are imperatives by any means. They're ridiculous. But how is it going to work? And the answer is almost always it's going to work the same way it does for male comedians. It's going to work the same way it does for everybody. Like, why? Only through this patriarchal, sort of this systematic patriarchal division of men and women does it feel like a, you know this sort of catastrophic um, this catastrophic uh, undertaking to again occupy a male space, quote unquote. Um, I feel like that's what Joan Rivers is doing tacitly by just being, right? And and again, like many of you mentioned, not just being, but being Joan Rivers, not trying to be, you know, anyone for anybody else, not be trying to sort of assimilate or whatever. Um, and then, I'm talking about male and female spaces. Like, I think now that the lines have been blurred to some extent, it's still a patriarchal society. There's still, yeah, there's still ceilings left to be glass ceilings left to be shattered and things like that. Um, but just the way she talks, right? In all those videos, it women talking like men talk. Oh well, how? Like I've said this before about other women, like Joan Rivers, I think pioneered this to some extent. Like she was fighting for the right for women to be perceived as assholes, for true equality. Because, women aren't supposed to talk like that. They're not supposed to talk about things like that. They're not supposed to do any of this stuff. And she's sort of saying, like, listen, I want to be an asshole too. And I'm not saying asshole like jerk, asshole like just sort of, I don't give a fuck about what you think either. So they're sort of, again, it's transgressive. That is transgressive. And it's this sort of double-edged sword where it's like, it's not really, but we may have made it transgressive because of the whole patriarchal society that says women aren't supposed to do all these things. Um, and here they are. They're doing them, and just as well. And I think it's, in many cases, it's infinitely more interesting, right? Because we've heard every fucking douchebag male comedian do the same bits about dating and all this other stuff. Like this female, this woman's perspective is infinitely more interesting and credible, and I think funny in this case. Um, so I think it's, not many of you mentioned it. A few of you did. The way she talks in that, the first one from the 60s, the black and white one, she's talking about body image. She's talking about the double standards of men can just get up and, walk out the door and they're gorgeous. They don't have, there's no makeup, there's no facial routine, there's no manicures, there's no pedicures, there's no doing the dance to look, to look presentable. And if, women like Midge Maisel, a lot of you guys brought up Midge Maisel, like a lot of her identity was attached to this like perfect housewife, which is what made her comedy so interesting and progressive. But, she had, like, she was still aghast if she had one hair out of place, right? Or didn't have the right dress or all these kinds of things. Like, hoops that women have to jump through that men just walk right over. And she's talking about body image before body image was a big issue in our culture. Now it's, you can't avoid it. But she's talking about it like all the sort of superficial hoops that women have to jump through just to like start their day and be a housewife. You had to look a certain way, you had to talk a certain way, all these things, and she's constantly undercutting them. And that's what good comedy does, right? It sort of undercuts the norm or the stereotype. I think good comedy tries to do that at least. It's kind of ironic, and you guys might, if you know Joan Rivers, you probably know her from Fashion Police. Like, she did that show on E. She sort of had this other side hustle, which was like she was somehow this fashion guru. And they just, after all the award shows, they'd go through everyone on the red carpet and be like, oh, that was an amazing dress, and that was fucking dumb, whatever. So that's how you guys probably know her or recognize her, but she has this whole other, like, comedy is what got her there. And confronting these issues, these body issues and things like that, is way ahead of its time. And I don't even think she knew she was doing it, right? I could be wrong. She was just, again, like a lot of you said, being honest, speaking the truth, being authentic. That's all you need to do. You know, especially for a woman, like you've you felt the struggle. You know, your struggle is real. Um, your trials and tribulations are visceral enough. Like there's no need to dress it up. You know, um, no pun intended. Actually, I did. I did intend that pun. Um, sorry. The women don't talk like this. I wrote on the side. I don't know why. Because they don't. They do now. I mean, it's. I don't think it's because she's very. I mean, I don't use these terms very often, but she would be considered vulgar, right? I think the way she talks, what she talks about in many ways, and women weren't supposed to be that. Now, I mean, you women, women of funny women, you know, you can, you know, you can muck it up with any dude in terms of just, being gross or whatever. You just don't have to flaunt it and, and boast about it and act like it makes you cool in some way. Um, for the for the most part, um, a lot. Her comedy was still this. Someone made the comment when we watched the documentary the first week. You know, she was a principal um, commentator in there, and she's the one who made the comment like, "You can't be pretty and funny." Remember that? And we were like, that kind of hit my ear wrong, and I made the statement that she's a throwback. Like she's from an era where like even she has been in it long enough that she still holds on to some of those more traditional um, comedic tropes. That being one of them. So, but I think watching these videos, she uses the setup punchline format, like like most of the comedians did at the time. But she's not just using it like as because she's a woman, because she's using it in the the arena of women and marriage and body image and education, all these kinds of things. She's elevating that setup punchline format, which can be extremely reductive and sort of boring, being a woman and sort of using it as a weapon. To be like, okay, this is the comedy of the age that I'm working in, but I'm not just going to use it to sort of sell out my community, women. I'm going to use it to expose some of the inconsistencies, right? And she's a better comedian than most who would just take the form and, you know, abuse it. I'm going to use this to get famous and rich and fuck everybody else. Like, I feel like she had a little bit more, there was something behind it. It was being this traditional mode of comedy was being weaponized by this woman in a different way, in a way that it had never been weaponized before, which was to, I think, combat some of these stereotypes and misconceptions. So that's always cool. Um, a great quote from the earlier sets is dumb doesn't matter when you're beautiful. Like kind of how frustrating that can be for there's so much weight in that statement. It's a lot to unpack there. Um, but again, I think that's a good tagline for her comedy was like she was focused on these kinds of things, right? I just don't think she was up there just to be up there, you know. I'm teaching stand up nation now too, so some of these discussions are bleeding over, but good comedy has something at stake, and there's clearly something at stake for Joan Rivers, right? And it's her femininity and womanhood and all those kinds of things are in jeopardy, and she wants to reclaim them and redefine those things, you know, in a world that likes to do that for us, right? Um, so a lot of the marriage stuff is interesting because it's basically she's kind of like saying what's the marriage versus the educated woman. Like marriage is for the uneducated. That was one of my takeaways when I was listening to it because she kept making these points like an educated woman would never get married because of the structure of marriage, especially in the 60s and 50s, 60s, 70s, like all that. Marriage has definitely changed since, um, but there's no. I feel like that was one of the takeaways, which is so interesting. Like any educated woman would run from a marriage proposal because of what it means. You're reduced to, you know, a cleaning, a cooking and cleaning and sex robot. Like basically that's what you become. There's no need for any of it. Um, I think that's an interesting way to look at it. Self-deprecation. A lot of you guys were like, she's self-deprecating. Like that takes balls, dude. Pardon me for using. That takes ovaries, dude. That's dumb. Um, but it does, and it's for me. It comes off as she's saying, "See, ladies, it's okay to be a woman, right? And embrace all of these imperfections, or as Megan said, the ugliness of being a woman." Um, so I'll get to some specific comments. Like I appreciate all of them. I do. Oh, and I'm gonna do this right now. So these videos, I I do them because I care, and I realize only a fraction of students watch these. Unfortunately, whatever. So what I'm gonna start doing is putting little Easter eggs in them, so that those of you who do watch them can be rewarded with extra credit and things like that, and lots of good goodies. So here's your first one. Um, if you have watched the video to this point, leave a comment on this post for this video, and use the word professor in your comment organically. Like I did this with the other class, and they were like, only 4 people got the Easter egg, which is it just breaks my heart. So sad. Whatever. 4 people, all of them. Hi, professor. Like, no, don't like make it like sneak it in. Use the word professor, extra credit towards your final grade. Professor in the comment on this video. Now to your comments. So Sam mentioned just the confidence and honesty that Joan Rivers sort of puts out there from start to finish. Like this is over, 30, 40 years. It's huge. Like I think I think it's something that a lot of comedians overlook is honesty. Like that's I think especially now more people want that. Like I just want you to be real with me, right? And the confidence it takes for a woman to be honest is, you know, so far exceeds that um, of any male comedian of any era. For a woman to be that confident and honest is was difficult, and um, again another transgressive thing. Like you just didn't see it. Um, and then Callista, what did Callista say? I wrote down for Callista's giving a voice to the voiceless, um, which is another thing that I think, another function of comedy. Yes, Callista said, I kept feeling like she was saying everything that so many other women were afraid to say. Right? That, I think, good comedians sort of lean into that. Like, I'm going to say it for these women because I know I'm not the only one. I know there's millions of women who feel this way, who experience these things, and are afraid to say it, are afraid to own it, are afraid to sort of step out of their, traditional role or stereotypical role. It's like the best comedians, especially in marginalized groups, women, um, homosexuals, people of color, comedians of color, like you know, they're giving voice to the voiceless, and it's a it's an oft overlooked function of comedy, I think. And Callista, you nailed that um, with that comment, so I appreciated it. Um, Joan Rivers is what happens when you stay true to yourself. That's something that was a thread that ran through all of your comments. Like she was the comedian she was in the 90s and the 2000s or whatever because she never wavered from who she is. I say this all the time, and I sort of believe it. Like I really believe it. I sort of believe it. If you're yourself long enough, people will accept you for it. Does that make sense? Like I'll use myself as an example. I haven't worn long pants since like high school. I wear shorts, and because I never wavered from that, nobody really like that's just who I am now. Like I was myself long enough that that I'm now seen as the guy who wears shorts. I know it's a stupid example, but it applies to more meaningful things than like what you wear. If you're yourself long enough, people will accept you. People will sort of, um, people will accept you. And that is Joan Rivers. Like she never wavered from that. She didn't give a fuck. She never wavered from who she was. And yeah, the world changed around her and she adapted her comedy to fit that, you know. If you track those videos, by the end she's talking about, her vagina sagging, like, all this stuff that she never could have said in the 60s, 70s. But in your mind, you're like, of course, that's the progression, right? She remained true to herself. And finally, I mentioned this before, but Megan's point about showing the ugly side of being a woman, it can't, I can't under, I can't over appreciate that comment. It's it's a slight twist on my she's fighting for the right to be an asshole for true equality. That's kind of what it reminds me of. She shows the ugly side of being a woman. And that, for many, for millions, is liberating. Like, to feel like, oh, it's okay if I feel this way, if I'm sick of my marriage, if I feel underappreciated, if I'm, insecure about how I look or what have you. It's okay. Like, other women feel the same way, and in many cases, it's the result of living in a society that undervalues us, right? So it's like that's what Joan Rivers helps to uncover, um, among others, of her time, but pave the way for you know, the litany of female comedians that are currently crushing it. So there. All right, guys. I'll be back with one of these on Friday. So keep up the online grind, and I'll see you. I'll see you soon. Bye.